Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into a personality type that I find really fascinating,
Yeah.
the INFJ. We love to go deep here, so get ready because whether you're an INFJ yourself or just curious about this typer, we got some good stuff for you.
Yeah, the document you provided for this deep dive is amazing. There's so much to unpack here about what makes INFJs tick.
Okay, so really quick, for anyone who's new to the Myers-Briggs world, INFJ stands for introversion, intuition, feeling, judging.
Yeah.
But always, we're not just scratching the surface here.
Like, this goes way beyond just 4 letters on a personality test. We're
Yeah.
talking about understanding the why behind the what.
Totally. So let's get into it. What are some of those core values and motivations that really define the INFJ personality?
Well, one of the most interesting things about INFJs is this kind of push and pull they have between idealism and action.
Okay, I can see that. It's like they have these big dreams for a better world, but they're not content with just dreaming. They actually want to make those dreams a reality.
Exactly. They don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk.
Yeah.
That's where their nickname, the Advocate, comes in. They often end up championing causes, fighting for social justice, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's not always in a super public spotlight kind of way. A lot of INFJs are more behind the scenes change makers.
Absolutely. They might not always be the loudest voice in the room, but they're definitely making their presence known through their actions.
It's like they've got this quiet determination. But thinking about INFJs in action, it reminds me of something we see in the research, this whole idea that their empathy can be both a superpower and a source of struggle.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the biggest paradoxes of the INFJ personality. They have this incredible ability to feel what others are feeling, to really step into their shoes, but it can also be incredibly draining for them.
Right. It's like they're carrying the weight of the world's emotions on their shoulders.
That's a great way to put it. They're like emotional sponges, soaking it all up.
Yeah.
And if they're not careful, they can get completely overwhelmed.
It makes you realize why self-care is so essential for INFJs. They need that time to recharge, to process everything they've absorbed.
100%. It's not selfish. It's essential for their well-being.
Okay, so we've got idealism, we've got empathy, we've got this need for solitude. What else is going on in that INFJ heart and mind?
Well, we can't talk about INFJs without talking about the door slam.
Okay, yes. The infamous door slam. Let's break that down because I think it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of the INFJ personality.
It really is. People hear door slam and they think it's this cold, heartless act.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's often coming from a place of deep hurt and a need to protect themselves.
Right. It's not something they do lightly.
Absolutely not. It takes a lot for an INFJ to reach that point.
Yeah.
But remember, they're carrying around everyone else's emotions along with their own. At a certain point, something has to give.
Yeah, they hit their limit and they have to create some distance to protect their own well-being.
Exactly. It's a self-preservation tactic. It doesn't mean they don't care. It just means they've reached a point where they need to prioritize their own needs.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about their core values, their empathy, their need to recharge, and even this idea of the door slam as a form of self-protection. But to really understand how all of this plays out in an INFJ's life, we need to talk about the engine that drives it all, their cognitive functions. Are you ready to get into the nitty-gritty of how INFJs process the world?
I'm ready. That's where things get really interesting because those cognitive functions are key to understanding the unique way INFJs see and interact with the world.
Okay, so let's break it down. First up, we have introverted intuition, or NI. What exactly is NI, and what role does it play in the INFJ's cognitive stack?
Well, think of it like this. Imagine having this internal radar that's constantly scanning for patterns, connections, and possibilities that most people completely miss. That's NI at work.
Whoa, so they're like picking up on those subtle cues, those underlying currents that often go unnoticed.
Exactly. It's like they have this sixth sense. And they might not even be able to explain how they know what they know. They just do.
Okay, that is both amazing and a little bit intimidating. Like, how do you even begin to understand someone who seems to just intuitively grasp things that others miss?
That's the beauty and the challenge of the INFJ. It really is. They just do. It's true. And often INFJs are drawn to things that allow them to use that intuition to make a difference in the world.
So we're talking about careers like counseling, teaching, maybe even writing or art.
Absolutely. Anything that lets them tap into that deep well of insight and use it to connect with others on a meaningful level.
And speaking of connecting with others, let's talk about extroverted feeling, or FE, because that's the INFJ's auxiliary function, right?
Exactly. If introverted intuition is like their inner compass, extroverted feeling is how they navigate the world outside themselves.
Okay, so how does that actually show up in their lives? I mean, we talked about empathy earlier, and I know that's a big part of Faye, but is there more to it than that?
There is. You're right. Empathy is a huge part of it. INFJs have this amazing capacity to understand and share the feelings of others. But it goes beyond just empathy. It's also about their values, their sense of right and wrong.
So it's like their moral compass is also wired to this function.
In a way, yes. Fee makes them very aware of social dynamics, of what's considered right and wrong in a social context, and it fuels their desire for harmony, for making the world a better place.
That makes sense. And it really highlights how important connection and relationships are to INFJs.
Absolutely. They thrive on deep, meaningful connections. They want to understand what makes people tick, what motivates them, what their hopes and dreams are.
Okay, so we've got introverted intuition guiding their inner world, and we've got extroverted feeling shaping how they interact with the world around them. What about the other two functions? Do they even get a say in things when those first two are so strong?
They do, though they might not always be as loud or as obvious. The INFJ's third function is introverted thinking, or TIE.
Introverted thinking. Okay,
Darn
so
right.
for our listeners who aren't familiar with that function, what exactly is introverted thinking and how does it play out in an INFJ?
Well, if you think of Ni as their intuitive side and Fei as their feeling side, T is their logical side. It's that voice in their head that's analyzing information, looking for inconsistencies, making sure everything makes sense.
So they have this strong sense of logic and reason operating under the surface, even if it's not always their primary mode of processing.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that even though INFJs are often described as feelers, they still have this capacity for logic and analysis. It's
Well,
just that it's more internal. It's about creating a sense of inner order and understanding rather than imposing that order on the outside world.
got it. So we've covered Ni, Fe, and Ti. That leaves us with one more function, extroverted sensing, or say. And I have to admit, this one always throws me for a loop a little bit when it comes to INFJs.
It's definitely the function that tends to get the least amount of airtime in the INFJ world.
Right. It's like the quiet kid in the back of the class who occasionally raises their hand, but mostly just observes.
That's a great way to put it. And it makes sense when you consider that extroverted sensing is all about experiencing the world through the five senses, about being present in the here and now.
Which, if we're being honest, isn't always an INFJ's strong suit. They tend to be more future-oriented, more in their heads than in their bodies.
Exactly. And because C is their least developed function, they might not always feel as comfortable or as competent navigating the concrete sensory world.
That actually reminds me of something you mentioned in the document about how stress can impact an INFJ's say. Something about how they might become overly sensitive to their environment when they're feeling overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely. It's like their intuition is so overloaded that C kind of awkwardly tries to take over, and they're suddenly hyper aware of every little sight, sound, and sensation.
Oh, wow. So not only are they dealing with whatever's stressing them out internally, but now the outside world is practically screaming at them too. That sounds rough.
It can be. It's like
Yeah.
their senses are all turned up to 11, and it
Uh-huh.
can be super overwhelming. It's definitely a sign that they need to step away, find some peace and quiet, and let their intuition recalibrate.
Yeah, time for a good dose of self-care. Maybe some noise-canceling headphones and a weighted blanket.
Exactly. Anything to create that sense of calm and help them reconnect with their inner world.
Okay, so we've explored the cognitive functions, the ins and outs of what makes INFJs tick. But, we like to bring things to life here.
Mhm.
So, are there any famous figures who might be members of the INFJ club? The document you provided had some interesting examples.
Yes. I love looking at famous figures through the lens of personality type. Of course, it's always speculative. We can never definitively type someone from a distance.
Of course, but it's still fun to speculate.
It is. And it can be a cool way to understand different personality types in action. For INFJs, a lot of people point to figures like Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela. Okay, I can absolutely see that. His leadership, his vision, his unwavering commitment to justice, those all seem very much in line with the INFJ archetype.
Right. And then there's Mother Teresa, another often cited example.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. Her
Yeah.
compassion, her dedication to serving others, her ability to inspire people all over the world. Definitely some INFJ vibes there.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to see how these potential INFJ traits manifest in such different ways. You've got leaders, activists, artists, writers, all united by this shared drive to make a difference in the world.
That's what I find so inspiring about INFJs. They remind us that it's not enough to just dream of a better world. We have to actively create it. And they show us that even the quietest voices can have the biggest impact.
Couldn't have said it better myself. They really do. It's about taking action, making those dreams a reality.
And they do it in their own way, which is often very insightful and thought-provoking. Okay, but speaking of insights and thought-provoking ideas, we have to talk about the MBTI itself, because you included some interesting points in the document about the criticisms and limitations of the MBTI. So what's the deal with that? Is the MBTI just a bunch of hooey?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay, good, because I was starting to get a little worried there. But seriously, what are some of the criticisms that have been leveled at the MBTI? I know it's not without its flaws.
Right. One of the biggest ones is that it relies on self-reporting, which means it's inherently subjective.
So our results might be influenced by things like our current mood or even how we want to see ourselves.
Exactly. And that can skew the results.
Mhm.
Another criticism is that it tends to oversimplify personality into these neat little boxes, when in reality, we all exist on a spectrum.
Yeah, it's like saying you can only be either a cat person or a dog person, when in reality, some people love both. Or maybe they're more into hamsters, who knows?
Precisely. Human personality is so much more nuanced than any test can fully capture. And the MBTI, while helpful, is just one lens through which to view ourselves.
That's a good point. It's a tool, not the be-all and end-all of self-discovery.
Absolutely. But even with those limitations, I do think the MBTI can be a really valuable tool for self-awareness, especially for a type like the INFJ, who often feels misunderstood or out of sync with the rest of the world.
So for INFJs, it's less about finding the perfect label and more about finding a language to describe their experiences, even if it's not always a perfect fit.
Exactly. It can be so validating for them to read those descriptions and think, oh my gosh, that's me. That's how my brain works. It's like they finally found a community of people who get them.
I love that. It's about finding your people, those who understand your unique way of seeing the world. And for INFJs, that can make all the difference.
It really can. And knowing their strengths and challenges, understanding how their minds work, can empower them to make choices that align with their values and live more fulfilling lives.
This has been so fascinating. I feel like I've learned so much about INFJs today, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too. They're such a complex and intriguing type.
They really are. So to all our INFJ listeners out there, thank you for sharing your unique gifts with the world. And to everyone else, keep those minds curious, keep asking those big questions, and most importantly, keep exploring all the amazing facets of human personality.